Major Jack Cooper stood at the viewing window of Mars Base Alpha, watching the dust devil dance across the rusty landscape with mild interest. Another Tuesday on the Red Planet, until the emergency klaxons shattered the monotony. Major Cooper to Command Center. Unidentified object entering atmosphere on crash trajectory. The AI's voice announced with practiced calm. Finally, Cooper muttered, already moving. Something interesting. 6 months of overseeing the base's survival training facility had left him itching for action. Though he hadn't expected it to come in the form of a crystalline teardrop ship tumbling through Mars' thin atmosphere, trailing prismatic light like a falling star. The ship's emergency landing systems must have kicked in because it managed to slow its descent before impact. Instead of exploding into a million glittering shards, it plowed a kilometer-long trench through the Martian soil before coming to rest. "Deploy Rescue Team Alpha," Cooper ordered, already suiting up, "and get medical on standby." 20 minutes later, he stood before the alien vessel, its translucent hull refracting the pale Martian sunlight into rainbow patterns across his visor. The ship's surface was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid crystal. "Never seen anything like it," his XO, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, whispered over the comm. Before Cooper could respond, a section of the hull simply dissolved, revealing the interior. The sight inside made him freeze. The aliens were crystalline beings, roughly humanoid but composed of transparent, faceted structures that caught the light like living diamonds. They were also, apparently, having complete mental breakdowns. "The gravity," one of them wailed in perfect English, its crystalline form vibrating with distress. "It's crushing us." Cooper checked his suit's readings. "0.3 standard Gs," he muttered. "They're panicking over Mars gravity." Another alien was curled into what Cooper assumed was a fetal position, its crystalline surface crackling with each gust of wind. "The atmospheric pressure variations are tearing us apart," it moaned. Cooper shared a look with Martinez. The atmospheric pressure was barely 1% of Earth's. "I am Voxel, third speaker of the Ixtali Confederation," the largest of the aliens announced, its form wavering like heat waves off hot pavement. "We request immediate evacuation to a stable environment before these lethal conditions shatter us completely." Cooper had been through sandstorms that would strip paint, survived wilderness training in both Antarctica and the Sahara, and once spent 3 weeks in a jungle so hostile that even the plants tried to kill him. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for advanced aliens that considered a mild Martian afternoon to be deadly. "Sir," Martinez said privately over their secure channel, "I think we just encountered our first space bubble wrap." Cooper bit back a laugh. "Major Jack Cooper, Mars Base Alpha Commander," he announced officially. "We'll get you to our medical facility. It's environmentally controlled." Environmental control. Voxel's crystalline form rippled with what might have been hope. "You can stabilize these chaotic conditions." "Standard procedure," Cooper assured them, wondering what kind of universe they came from where environmental control was a novel concept. "Lieutenant, let's get them inside before another dust devil shows up and gives them a real reason to panic." As his team helped the aliens into emergency transport pods, Cooper couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger than a simple rescue. He'd spent his career teaching humans how to survive in hostile conditions, but these beings seemed to have no concept of adaptation at all. The last alien was barely secured when a light gust of wind swept across the landing site. Their crystalline forms all vibrated in synchronized terror. "Major," Voxel called out, "how do your people survive in such barbaric conditions?" Cooper smiled behind his visor. "That's what I do, Speaker Voxel. I teach survival. And something tells me your people might be interested in a few lessons." The wind picked up slightly, and the collective whimper from their new guests suggested those lessons couldn't start soon enough. The medical bay of Mars Base Alpha wasn't designed for crystalline aliens who considered the slightest vibration a catastrophic event. Cooper watched through the observation window as Dr. Rodriguez tried to conduct a basic examination of their guests, who were currently hovering in null graph fields. "I apologize," Voxil said, their crystalline form stabilizing slightly in the reduced gravity. "But your scanning device produces micro-vibrations that could cause stress fractures." Rodriguez looked at the medical scanner in her hand, then at Cooper, with an expression that clearly said, "You've got to be kidding me." "Speaker Voxil," Cooper began carefully, "I'm having trouble understanding how your species achieved space travel if you're this sensitive to environmental changes." The alien's surface rippled with what Cooper was learning to recognize as pride. "Our vessels maintain perfect environmental stability, quantum-locked fields, zero-vibration engines, absolute atmospheric consistency." A shimmer of distress passed through their form. "Until we hit that gravitational anomaly, and our systems failed." "You mean that minor solar wind burst?" Martines asked from her position by the door. She'd refused to miss what she called first contact with space Fabergé eggs. "Minor." Another Ixtali, who'd introduced themselves as Kex, vibrated in horror. "It disrupted our stability fields by 0.003%. Cooper pinched the bridge of his nose. "Right, and I'm guessing your home world is." "Perfect," Voxil finished, "as all civilized worlds are. No tectonic movement, no atmospheric variation, no temperature fluctuation. We had assumed your Mars colony existed in similar conditions, given that you survive here." "About that," Cooper said, pulling up Earth's environmental data on the main screen. "This is where we're from." The reaction was immediate. Every Ixtali in the room crystallized in shock, their version of fainting. When they recovered, Voxil spoke in what could only be described as religious horror. This cannot be correct. Daily temperature variations of tens of degrees, atmospheric pressure changes, active geological processes. Their form flickered rapidly. And you say humans drink different types of water. "Well, yeah," Martines chimed in. "There's tap water, mineral water, sparkling." 3 more Ixtali crystallized. "Lieutenant," Cooper warned, though he was fighting back a grin. "My apologies, Major," she said, not looking sorry at all. "I was about to mention swimming pools." The remaining conscious aliens vibrated in collective horror. "Speaker Voxil," Cooper interrupted before Martinez could traumatize their guests further. "I'm curious why you came to Mars if you're not equipped for environmental variations." The alien's response was unexpected. "We need your help," Voxil said, their crystalline form dimming. "The galaxy is changing. Stability fields are failing on colonial worlds. Environmental systems that have worked for millions of years are showing fluctuations. And your people don't know how to adapt," Cooper finished, understanding dawning. "Not just my people, Major. The entire Galactic Coalition. We, Voxil, seem to struggle with the admission. We have classified your Earth as a Class 13 death world. The fact that your species not only survived but thrived there, many considered it impossible. Some still do." Martinez whistled low. "A whole galaxy of bubble-wrap people. No offense." "None taken, though I don't understand the reference," Voxil said. "But yes, our civilizations evolved in perfect conditions. We never needed to adapt. Until now." Cooper looked at the assembled aliens, then back at Earth's data on the screen. A plan was forming in his mind, one that would either get him court-martialed or change the galaxy. "Speaker Voxil," he said slowly, "how would your people feel about taking some survival lessons from a bunch of Deathworlders?" The alien's response was cut off by the base's warning system. "Dust storm approaching. Moderate intensity." The collective panic from their guests answered Cooper's question. These lessons couldn't start soon enough. "This is highly irregular." The holographic form of Ambassador Ltix shimmered with disapproval. "Teaching survival skills to coalition species on Earth. The very suggestion is primitive." Cooper offered from his seat at the UN emergency session, After 3 weeks of bureaucratic wrangling, he was losing patience with alien diplomats who couldn't even handle virtual meetings without stability fields. "I was going to say unprecedented," Lutix replied stiffly. Their crystalline form refracted the holographic light into dancing patterns across the chamber walls. "So does the collapse of your environmental systems," Cooper countered. "Speaker Voxel, would you share the latest numbers?" Voxel's hologram materialized, still using a null-grav field despite being a projection. Old habits died hard. 17 colony worlds now report critical stability failures. Conservative estimates suggest 40% of coalition worlds will experience environmental fluctuations within 5 standard years. The chamber erupted in the alien equivalent of muttering, a crystalline harmonic that made Cooper's teeth itch. "And your solution," Ambassador Lutix said, "is to teach our people to be unstable." "To adapt," Cooper corrected. "My family's ranch in Montana has everything we need. Variable weather, terrain challenges, and enough space to build environmentally controlled safe zones for emergencies. Plus, Earth gravity will." Earth gravity. The harmonic reached a pitch that cracked someone's water glass. "You expect us to subject our people to Earth's brutal gravitational field?" Cooper smiled. "We'll start them in null grav and work up gradually, like physical therapy." "Major Cooper," a new voice cut through the chamber. A tall, crystalline form materialized, its facets arranged in what Cooper recognized as aristocratic patterns. "I am Valara, head researcher of environmental studies. Your proposal is intriguing." Cooper sat straighter. This was new. "You support the idea?" "I wish to observe this training personally," Valara said, managing to make the word training sound like an exotic and possibly dangerous concept. "If our people must learn to endure chaos, better to do so under controlled conditions than wait for emergency evacuations." "My ranch is hardly chaos," Cooper protested. "Well, except during tornado season." 3 holograms crystallized at the word tornado. Valera's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "You see, already you speak of atmospheric violence as if it were routine. Fascinating. Does this mean you're volunteering?" Cooper asked. "Someone of my standing must verify this isn't some elaborate attempt to shatter the entire next generation of coalition leadership," Valera replied. "I shall observe your methods." 2 hours and countless diplomatic meltdowns later, Cooper stood in his old family ranch house, watching construction drones assemble the first phase of what the media was already calling Deathworld Academy. The name hadn't been his idea, but it was catching on. "Your dwelling contains unfiltered atmospheric access," Valera observed from inside her personal stability field. She'd arrived hours ahead of schedule, apparently keen to start her observation. "These windows, they open." "That's the general idea," Cooper said, demonstrating with the nearest one. Valera's field intensified at the gust of spring air. "Deliberate exposure to environmental variations," she muttered, making notes on a crystalline tablet. "Do your young survive this learning process?" Cooper thought about his childhood, climbing trees, swimming in the creek, getting caught in rainstorms. "Usually," he said with a straight face. Valera's form flickered. "You jest. But tomorrow, the first group arrives. 200 of our most promising youth volunteered by their families for this experiment. If any are shattered, they won't be," Cooper assured her. "Trust me, by the time I'm done, your people will be having picnics in the rain, consuming nutrition during precipitation." Valera's horror was almost palpable. "Perhaps I should reconsider my participation." A distant rumble of thunder cut her off. Valera's stability field hummed into overdrive. Cooper smiled. "Lesson 1 starts early, it seems. Ever heard of a thing called spring in Montana?" The look Valera gave him suggested she was already regretting every decision that had led to this moment. But beneath her crystalline exterior, Cooper caught a glimmer of something else. Curiosity. Maybe there was hope for the bubble wrap universe after all. "This," Cooper announced to his terrified audience, "is rain." 200 crystalline forms huddled under their personal stability fields in the ranch's main training dome, watching the controlled precipitation demonstration with various degrees of horror. After a week of theoretical lessons, it was time for practical applications. Notice how the water droplets fall in a predictable pattern, he continued, walking through the light drizzle. No different than your sonic cleansing chambers, just more natural. Natural is a matter of perspective, Major, Valera commented from her observation post. She'd spent the week documenting everything with scientific precision, though Cooper had caught her intensifying her stability field whenever he demonstrated particularly chaotic concepts like wind. Which is why today's lesson is voluntary, Cooper said, grinning at his students. Who wants to be the first to experience real rain? The silence was broken only by the gentle patter of water droplets. Perhaps a demonstration of survival benefits, Valera suggested, her crystalline form shifting in what Cooper now recognized as academic interest. Right. Cooper picked up a dirty piece of equipment. Watch this. He held it in the rain, letting the water wash away the dust. Natural cleaning system. Plus, it helps plants grow, fills reservoirs, and creates these things called rainbows. I volunteer, a young Ixtali suddenly announced, stepping forward. Cooper recognized him as Kix, one of the more curious students. Excellent, Cooper said, ignoring the horrified harmonics from the others. Just step out of your stability field whenever you're ready. Kix's crystalline surface trembled as he deactivated his field. The first droplet hit him with a tiny ping. Kix's voice wavered. I remain intact. Keep going, Cooper encouraged. More droplets fell. Kix's surface started refracting the water in fascinating patterns, creating tiny prisms of light. This sensation, it's not harmful. He paused, searching for words. It's like a massage in sonic crystallization chambers, but more random. More natural, Cooper suggested. Fascinating. Valera had moved closer, her scientific detachment cracking like thin ice. The water appears to be creating micro-vibrations that stimulate surface adaptation rather than causing structural stress. You mean, Kix said, now standing fully in the rain, this is making me stronger. Cooper nodded. Environmental adaptation. The more you experience, the more resilient you become. On Earth, we call it building character. Valera's note-taking reached frenzied speeds. The implications for our crystalline architecture, our entire approach to environmental engineering. She paused, her form flickering with what might have been embarrassment. Perhaps a closer observation is warranted. Cooper tried to hide his smile as Valera slowly, deliberately, reduced her stability field's intensity. The class watched in shocked silence as their aristocratic observer extended one crystalline arm into the rain. The droplets created a haunting chime as they struck her surface. Valera's usual perfect geometric patterns began to shift, adapting to the new sensation. Remarkable, she whispered. The chaos. It has a pattern of its own. That broke the dam. One by one, students began deactivating their fields, stepping into the rain with a mixture of terror and wonder. The dome filled with crystalline chiming as water struck their surfaces, creating an otherworldly symphony. You're not just teaching survival, Valera said quietly to Cooper as she finally stepped fully into the rain. You're teaching us how to live. Same thing, sometimes, Cooper replied. He watched as Kix discovered he could change the sounds by altering his surface structure, leading to an impromptu rain music session. Tomorrow we'll try wind. Valera's form shimmered with what might have been a laugh. One chaos at a time, Major. The lesson ended with something unprecedented in coalition history. A group of Ixtali voluntarily remaining in precipitation, playing with sound patterns and watching in amazement as their forms adapted and strengthened. Valera's recording of the event, transmitted that evening, would go viral across coalition space. The sight of primitive survival training producing something beautiful would spark fierce debates about the nature of adaptation versus stability. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, Cooper watched his students discovering that chaos wasn't always the enemy. Even if tomorrow's wind lesson would probably give their diplomatic observers a collective crystallization. The Montana sky turned an ominous green-black, and Cooper knew they were in trouble. The weather control system had malfunctioned, turning what should have been a controlled demonstration into a very real situation. Status. He barked into his comm as the first golf ball-sized hailstones began to fall. Systems locked up, Martins reported from the control room. Can't shut it down remotely. ETA on repairs is 20 minutes. Cooper looked at his class of crystalline aliens, now 3 weeks into their training. They'd mastered rain, handled light winds, and even dealt with minor temperature changes. But this? Everyone to the shelter, he ordered, pointing to the reinforced bunker. But it was too far, nearly 100 meters across open ground. Valara, who'd long since abandoned her stability field for regular classes, assessed the situation with remarkable calm. The hail will shatter the younger ones before they make it halfway. As if to prove her point, a hailstone struck the ground nearby with a crack like a gunshot. Several students crystallized in terror. That's when Kix did something unprecedented. Instead of freezing or running, the young Ixtali's crystalline form began to shift. His usually smooth surface developed angular facets, interlocking like armor plates. "I can deflect the hail," he shouted, positioning himself above a group of younger students. Cooper watched in amazement as the hailstones bounced off Kix's transformed surface with musical pings. Valera's form shimmered with sudden understanding. "Of course. Our defensive architectures. We've always had them. We just never needed." She too began to transform, her elaborate aristocratic patterns reorganizing into protective geometries. "Everyone, remember the crystalline defense formations from our history texts." One by one, the stronger students began to change, creating a canopy of living crystal shields over their weaker classmates. The air filled with a symphony of hail strikes as they began their careful progress toward the bunker. "They're adapting," Cooper breathed, watching what looked like living sacred geometry in motion. "Not just surviving, they're protecting each other." "Major," Valara called out, "your environment suit won't hold against this size of hail. Join us under the shield formation." Cooper didn't argue, ducking under the crystalline canopy. Up close, he could see how each impact was causing micro-adjustments in their structures, making them stronger with each hit. "You know," he said to Valara as they moved, "in all our theoretical classes about threat response, I never expected this." "Neither did we," she replied, her voice carrying new strength. "Our ancestors used these formations to protect our cities during our world's final geological event, eons ago. We thought they were just historical curiosities, but the knowledge remained, waiting in our very structure." They reached the bunker just as the repair team restored control, the hailstorm dissipating as quickly as it had formed. The students maintained their defensive formations for a few moments longer, as if reluctant to let go of their newfound strength. "Is everyone intact?" Cooper called out. The responding harmony was stronger than he'd ever heard from them. "More than intact," Kix said, his surface slowly relaxing back to its normal patterns, though something about its structure seemed permanently altered. "We're stronger." Valara was already documenting the event, her usual scientific precision enhanced by obvious excitement. "The implications are staggering. Our bodies remember adaptations from millions of years ago, with the right triggers. We're not helpless," another student said, wonder in their harmonic. "We never were." Cooper looked at his class, really looked at them. Gone were the terrified beings who considered a light breeze lethal. In their place stood creatures of living crystal who had just discovered their own strength. "Right," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Who's ready to learn about thunderstorms?" The answering harmonic nearly shattered the bunker's windows. Even Valara's form rippled with what was definitely enthusiasm. "But first," Cooper added with a grin, "we're going to talk about something really challenging. puddle jumping. The collective groan was perfectly human in its exasperation. Progress, Cooper thought, came in many forms. Some of them just happened to be crystalline. The solar storm will hit New Haven Colony in 6 hours. Ambassador Ultix's hologram reported. They're usually perfect crystalline form showing signs of stress fractures. 2 million Ixtali. No time for evacuation. Our environmental shields are already failing. Cooper glanced at Valara, who had refused to withdraw from training despite her diplomatic status. They shared the same thought. This was what they'd been preparing for. How many Academy graduates are on New Haven? Cooper asked. 43, Valera answered immediately, including Kix, who's been teaching adaptation techniques. Not enough, Litix lamented. Even if they could protect a few hundred each. You're thinking like a coalition member, Cooper interrupted. Ambassador, how many of your colony's environmental control centers are still operational? 6 out of 12, but without full coverage. We don't need full coverage, Cooper said, already moving to the command center's display. We need smart coverage. Valara. She stepped forward, her crystalline form shifting into what Cooper now recognized as her tactical configuration. All clean lines and sharp angles. The graduates can coordinate evacuation zones, use the functioning environmental centers as hubs. And, she paused, her surface rippling with inspiration, teach emergency adaptations to those willing to learn. In 6 hours, Litix's harmonic was pure disbelief. You'd be surprised what people can learn when survival depends on it, Cooper said. I need a ship ready in 10 minutes. Valara, gather every graduate who can deploy. Survival gear for 2 weeks. I'm going with you, she said. It wasn't a question. 30 minutes later, their emergency response ship broke orbit, carrying 20 of the Academy's best graduates. Cooper watched them prepare during the flight, their crystalline forms practicing the defensive formations that had become second nature. Remember, he told them, you're not just survivors now. You're teachers. Every Ixtali has the same potential you do. They just need to wake it up. The scene that greeted them on New Haven was chaos by coalition standards, which meant it was barely a Category 2 on Cooper's disaster scale. The colony's massive environmental domes were flickering, their perfect stability already compromised by the storm's approach. Valera took command with the authority of her station, her voice carrying over the panicked harmonics. All citizens, focus on the sound of my resonance. We will guide you through this crisis. Cooper watched with pride as his graduates spread out, each taking charge of a sector. Kix, already a local leader, demonstrated the basic defensive configuration to a group of terrified colonists. Like this, he instructed, his form shifting to deflect a burst of increased radiation. The ability is in your structure. Let the pressure of survival awaken it. Hour by hour, the impossible happened. Ixtali, who had never experienced environmental variation, began to adapt. The Academy graduates led by example, their confidence infectious. When the main storm hit, instead of mass crystallization, something remarkable occurred. Standing on a command platform, Cooper watched as thousands of Ixtali formed massive, interconnected defensive patterns. The sight reminded him of Earth's coral reefs, complex, beautiful, and incredibly resilient. Valera stood beside him, her form configured to deflect the worst of the radiation, while she coordinated the response. They're doing it, she said, wonder in her harmonic. Not just surviving, thriving. Look. Cooper saw what she meant. The patterns weren't just defensive, they were evolving, becoming more efficient with each wave of solar energy. The Ixtali were learning, adapting in real time. Your people never lost their strength, Cooper told her. They just needed a reason to remember it. The storm raged for 18 hours. When it finally passed, not a single Ixtali had been lost. But something had been gained, something beyond survival. We are change, Valera observed, watching the colonists maintain their new configurations even after the danger passed. This is what you meant about adaptation being more than just survival training, isn't it? Cooper nodded, looking at the transformed colony. The perfect, sterile geometry of their architecture was already being modified, incorporating the stronger patterns they discovered. Sometimes, he said, you have to break out of your comfort zone to discover what you're really capable of. Valera's form shifted, catching the light of New Haven's rising sun in a way that seemed both ancient and entirely new. I believe, she said, we're just getting started. Permission to enter without a stability field. The young Centaurian diplomat asked, their gas-based form swirling with nervous energy outside Cooper's office. Granted, Cooper replied, hiding his smile. 6 months after New Haven, and the coalition was changing faster than anyone had predicted. Even gaseous species were starting to experiment with environmental adaptation. The diplomats' containment field dissolved, allowing their purple-tinged form to experience Earth's atmosphere directly. They shuddered, then stabilized. Fascinating. The pressure variations are invigorating. That's one word for it, Valera commented from her desk. No longer crystalline perfect, but bearing the subtle facets and patterns that marked her as a veteran of New Haven. She'd refused to return to her diplomatic post, instead becoming the Academy's head of Xenophysiology research. The Coalition Council has approved your expansion proposal, the diplomat announced, their gaseous form pulsing with each word. 12 new training facilities across Earth. They're calling it the Great Awakening. Cooper leaned back in his chair, looking at the headlines floating on his display. Coalition Species Embrace Change. New Havian Techniques Revolutionize Colonial Design. DDATHWORLDACADEMY2DA. REHES ONEMIA.
Any word on the opposition? He asked. There were still plenty of traditionalists who viewed adaptation as a threat to their perfect, stable society. Diminishing, the diplomat replied, especially after the Regellian success. Cooper nodded. The Regellians, amorphous liquid beings who had spent eons in perfectly regulated containment spheres, had recently used their newfound adaptation abilities to explore their homeworld's oceans for the first time in their species' history. It's more than just survival now, Valera said, her form shifting to display some of her latest research data. Every species is rediscovering lost abilities. The Andromedids can now withstand temperature variations of up to 10 degrees. The Proxima colonies are experimenting with weather patterns. Even the Arcturians. She was interrupted by a crack of thunder that rattled the windows. The diplomat instinctively compressed their gaseous form, then forcibly relaxed. Just a spring storm, Cooper assured them. Though you might want to watch this. He gestured to the window. Outside, a group of first-year students, a mix of various coalition species, was experiencing their first thunderstorm. But instead of panic, they were playing. Crystalline Ixtali formed living lightning rods, their surfaces dancing with electrical charge. Gaseous Centaurians rode the wind currents, their forms swirling in complex patterns. Liquid Regellians created rainbow-catching ripples in the puddles. There, enjoying the chaos, the diplomat observed, awe in their fluctuating form. Not chaos, Valera corrected. Natural variation. There's a difference. We just forgot that over millions of years of pursuing perfect stability. Cooper watched as Kix, now a full instructor, demonstrated a particularly complex weather adaptation technique to a group of advanced students. His once perfect crystalline form now bore the marks of countless storms, each one making him stronger. The Coalition Science Council wants to present you with their highest honor, the diplomat said to Cooper. They say you've initiated the most significant evolutionary advancement since our species first achieved environmental control. Cooper shook his head. I just showed them what was already there. Humans didn't teach the Coalition how to adapt. We just reminded them why it matters. Nevertheless, the diplomat's form swirled with formal patterns. the council insists, though they request the ceremony be held in one or controlled environments. No, Cooper and Valera said simultaneously. They'll receive their honors right here. Valera continued, her form catching a flash of lightning in a dazzling display. In the rain, if necessary. It's time the council experience what their people are capable of. The diplomat's form rippled with what might have been laughter. I'll convey your conditions. After they left, Cooper joined Valera at the window. The storm was intensifying, but none of the students sought shelter. Instead, they were adapting, evolving, discovering new ways to thrive in conditions their ancestors would have considered lethal. We're going to need a bigger ranch, Cooper mused. Valera's form shifted into the more relaxed configuration she used around him. The universe just got a lot more interesting. Above them, the storm raged on, and below, the future of the galaxy learned to dance in the rain.
5 years to the day after the first raindrop fell on a terrified HFY student, Cooper stood before the largest graduating class in Academy history. 10,000 beings from across the Coalition filled the Montana Valley, their various forms creating a living tapestry of adaptation. The morning sun caught Valera's crystalline form as she took the podium, her surface now a complex mixture of refined aristocratic patterns and battle-burned adaptations. Like many Coalition species, the HFY had found a balance between their ancient pursuit of perfection and their newfound strength and variation. When I first arrived at this facility, she began, her harmonic carrying across the valley. I believed I was here to observe primitive survival techniques. Instead, I discovered something far more valuable: the truth about strength. Cooper watched from his position on stage, remembering that first terrified class. Now, Kix led the Academy's advanced adaptation programs. The Centaurian who'd once feared a light breeze headed their atmospheric sciences division. Even Ambassador Latix had finally agreed to experience rain personally, though they still complained about the excessive hydration. We thought stability was perfection, Valera continued. We were wrong. Perfection is the ability to embrace change, to grow stronger through challenge. The ground trembled. Magnitude 5.2, Cooper's implant reported. A few years ago, such a tremor would have caused mass panic among Coalition species. Today, something very different happened. Without missing a beat, the crystalline graduates shifted into reinforcement patterns. Gaseous beings created stabilizing wind currents. Liquid species dampened the vibrations. Working together, 10,000 beings adapted to the earthquake, as naturally as breathing. Valera's form rippled with pride. As I was saying, she continued, drawing appreciative laughter, to grow stronger through challenge. Though I admit, the planet's timing could have been better. More laughter. Cooper couldn't help but smile. Earth had become known throughout the Coalition as the ultimate teaching ground, a planet that seemed to delight in providing pop quizzes to its students. Today, we celebrate not just your graduation, Valera said, but a transformation. The millionth Coalition citizen to embrace adaptation. Our worlds are changing, but now so can we. She gestured to the valley around them. Where there had once been only carefully controlled training zones, now there was a blend of natural terrain and adaptive architecture. The Academy itself had evolved, its buildings incorporating both Coalition technology and Earth-inspired resilience. Major Cooper, Valera turned to him, her form shifting into formal presentation mode. Would you join me? Cooper stepped forward, already suspicious. Valera had been unusually secretive lately, spending long hours in communication with the Coalition Council. The Coalition has created a new position, she announced, Director of Adaptive Development. They need someone with both the experience to understand environmental challenges and the ability to help others face them. Her form sparkled with what he now recognized as suppressed amusement. Naturally, I accepted on your behalf. Cooper blinked. You did what now? Consider it payback for that surprise thunderstorm lesson in year 1, she said, generating another wave of laughter from the graduates who remembered that particular class. Before Cooper could respond, The ground shook again. This time, the graduates didn't just adapt, they celebrated. Crystalline beings created prismatic displays in the sunlight. Gaseous forms danced in complex atmospheric patterns. Liquid species painted the air with rainbow mists. It was beautiful. It was chaotic. It was perfect. "Well," Cooper said finally, watching his students demonstrate just how far they'd come, "I suppose the galaxy could use a few more survival lessons." "That's the spirit." Valera's form shifted into the more relaxed configuration she used with friends. "Though perhaps we should wait until after graduation to mention the volcanic training facility we're building on Hawaii." Cooper laughed. 5 years ago, the idea of coalition species voluntarily experiencing volcanic conditions would have been absurd. Now there was probably already a waiting list. The celebration continued into the evening. 10,000 beings from across the galaxy demonstrating that chaos wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, to dance with, to grow through. And somewhere in the crowd, a new student experienced their first raindrop and smiled. The universe, it seemed, had finally learned to bend instead of break.